888-3986.
What's stopping you?
Why do I need to confess my sins to a priest?
What's stopping you? This is Called to Communion with Dr. David Anders on the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network.
Hey, we made it. It is Friday, and this is the Friday edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN, the program for our non-Catholic brothers and sisters. If you are not a Catholic, we would love to hear from you with the questions that you might have about the Catholic faith. Here's our phone number, 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. And like the woman says on the beginning of the show there, what's stopping you from becoming a Catholic? Maybe you were an active Catholic years ago, fell away for whatever reason, and now you're thinking about the Catholic faith again, but you need to clear up a few things before crossing over that threshold. So we'd love to hear from you as well. Maybe you have no intention of becoming a Catholic, and yet here you are listening to this program. We'd like to know why. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Phones that get very busy on Fridays as a rule, so you may want to call early if you have a question for us. All right, and can I also add this? If you are listening to us outside of North America, we have a special line just for you. Dial the U.S. country code and then 205-271-2985. You can also text the letters EWTN to 55000. Wait for our response, and then text us your first name and your brief question. Message and data rates may apply. A lot of folks like to text. I do it all the time. Maybe you do as well. You can certainly text your question to us at 55000. And you can always send us an email, ctc@ewtn.com, ctc@ewtn.com. Charles Beery is our producer. We also have Jeff Burson on social media. And trying to figure out who's doing who. Michael. Thank you, Michael. Michael McCall is handling the phones today in Ryan's absence. I'm Tom Price along with Dr. David Anders.
Tom, how are you today?
Very well. How are you, my friend?
Oh, I'm doing decent, thank you.
Weekend plans? What do you think?
Just probably trying to do some housework, maybe do a little reading, a little writing.
How's that book coming? He looks down.
I asked my good friend Father Lambert one time, I said, Father Lambert, why did you never write a book? He had a lot to say. And he sort of sighed and he said, oh, the perfect was the enemy of the good.
Ah.
Yeah.
Isn't that the truth?
Yeah. I've been on it for a while, but I keep going back over the same chapters and rewriting them and throwing them out and rewriting them.
We'll be looking for it when it does come out.
Thank you.
Here's a great email from Robert in Canyon City, Colorado, who says, the word priest in Greek, spelled H-I-E-R-E-U-S, never occurs in Paul's epistles. I find it curious that an office so vital in Catholicism isn't even mentioned in all of Paul's correspondence with churches. In fact, I find that the New Testament knows nothing of a sacerdotal class in contrast to the laity. In addition to its references to Levitical priests in the Gospels, Acts, and the book of Hebrews, the New Testament only applies the term to Jesus' unique high priesthood in Hebrews and to the priesthood of all believers in 1 Peter and Revelation. So, that being the case, is it no wonder that evangelical Christians repudiate the whole idea of a priestly office in the church today? And again, that's from Robert in Colorado.
Thanks, Robert. I really appreciate the question. First of all, I would take issue with your characterization of Paul, because in Romans chapter 15, he does actually use the word priest in reference to himself, where he talks about his priestly ministry, and that, namely, configuring the Gentiles as a pure offering to give to God. And there's clear language of sacrifice in St. Paul, and references to the liturgy, the Greek word liturgos, right, as the form of worship that is proportionate to God. And that's, of course, a term drawn from the cultic life of ancient Israel. So there are a lot of cognate and related terms, not always used in substantive form, sometimes adjectivally, where clear analogies between the apostolic ministry and the Levitical priesthood are established. But so I don't think your characterization is exactly accurate. However, clearly there are other terms that the New Testament prefers in identifying the ministers of the new covenant. So presbyter, of course, is the major one that we find. And, of course, book of Acts chapter 14 tells us that the apostles appointed presbyters in each of the churches that they founded. And in the same way, when Paul writes the pastoral epistles to Timothy and Titus, he clearly indicates that these individuals have an extraordinary authority and ministry for handing on the faith and appointing successors. So, I do think that there is apostolic succession, there is a apostolically governed leadership class, and there is language of priesthood and sacrifice and liturgy that pervades the texts. Now, I think more to the point is that when you say it's no wonder that evangelicals reject the doctrine of the priesthood, well, what's more interesting is the fact that the first 1,500 years of the church found the doctrine so absolutely scintillatingly obvious. Right? It's not surprising to me that evangelicals reject it because that's what they learned to do from their tradition. Right? I mean, we learned, growing up evangelical as I did, we learned from Martin Luther that the priesthood was conferred upon all believers and that there was no special class, no sacerdotal class, as you put it, in the Christian church. I learned that not from sacred scripture. I learned that from my Presbyterian catechism and from reading the works of Martin Luther. And I also learned something else that's not in scripture. I learned that I should do ecclesiology. I should do my theology of the church with reference to the Bible alone, right? And so the way to come up, this is what I learned as a child, as a Protestant, the way to kind of think through offices in the church and what the church is was to go to scripture and see what I could discern, and then kind of put it together into a coherent theory, and that would be my doctrine of the church, and that's the way you should do it. Well, the Bible actually never says that about itself, and Jesus never said that. Jesus never said, when doing your ecclesiology, make sure you consult exclusively the 27 letters of the canonical New Testament. He never said that, right? And so it's applying a principle that is actually unbiblical. Sola Scriptura is an unbiblical principle, and it doesn't work very well because among the churches that hold to the principle of Sola Scriptura, they have radically different ecclesiologies. In fact, the issue on which Protestant churches are most likely to disagree with one another is precisely the doctrine of the church. So I say that as a rule of faith is not adequate to answer these kinds of questions. You have to advert to sacred tradition.
Robert, thanks so much for your call. We're going to come back and talk with lots of great folks. Could be you too as well. 833-288-3986 on Call to Communion.
The Catechism of the Catholic Church has a great quote from St. John Chrysostom on prayer in paragraph 2744. It reads, quote, "Nothing is equal to prayer. For what is impossible, it makes possible. What is difficult, easy. For it's impossible for the man who prays eagerly and invokes God ceaselessly ever to sin." Close quote. That's the power of prayer. So, what are we waiting for? Let's get to praying.
Hello, I'm Kristalina Everett, host of Women Made New. Each week, we sit down with our guests to discuss a range of issues confronting us as Catholic women in today's ever-changing society. Together, we can grow in our relationships with God and each other. You are not alone, and let's heal our brokenness together, where women help women get closer to God. On Women Made New, Saturdays at noon Eastern on EWTN Radio.
The wisdom of Mother Angelica.
The devil will always do his best to tempt you into sin until you get to that place where you love sin. That's what he wants. He wants you down there with him. And not because he loves you, he hates you. When you do what the enemy tempts you to do, he does it out of pure hatred.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
EWTN Radio now on over 350 Catholic AM and FM radio stations in the U.S., over 500 stations around the world in English and Spanish. Now, if you don't have a Catholic radio station in your area, well, guess what? God might be calling you to a mission in Catholic radio. Find out how you can start up a Catholic radio station where you live. Contact Jack Williams. Here's his email address, jwilliams@ewtn.com. jwilliams@ewtn.com. It is Called to Communion, the Friday edition thereof, here on EWTN Radio. If you're ready now, let's go to those phones at 833-288-EWTN. We begin with Jim in Virginia Beach, listening on the EWTN app, a first-time caller. Hey, Jim, what's on your mind today?
Thank you for taking my call, and I appreciate the show.
Thank you.
My question is in regard to the catechism. I understood that recently Pope Francis made a change to the catechism with regard to the death penalty, and I was wondering how that works, because I understood the catechism to be the official teachings of the Church, and so how can Pope Francis then just change the official teachings if that's correct?
Okay, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So first of all, let's talk about what the catechism is and the status of the catechism as a catechetical document, okay? The catechism is a work of the ordinary magisterium of the Catholic Church. And what that means is that Christ, when he founded the Church, he appointed the 11 and their successors as apostles and bishops and gave them the charge of handing on the faith, teaching everything he'd commanded, making disciples of all nations, and his promise of divine assistance, he'd be with them till the end of the age. So every bishop, including the Pope, has a duty. When he gets up in the morning and puts his socks on and hops out of bed, he's got a job to do, and the job is to hand on faithfully the deposit of faith, and that's his job, right? And in the course of his daily and his life work, he's always seeking, whatever bishop or priest or pope is on the job, he's always seeking for the best way, most effective way, most charitable way to do that in his particular historical circumstances. And so, to take a kind of concrete pastoral example, if a pastor is a pastor of a church in maybe an immigrant community in Southern California with a lot of migrant workers that are having a rough time of negotiating maybe the coronavirus and its impact on their jobs and their families, when he gets up and preaches a homily in the morning, he may tailor his homily, the way he approaches the text, with an eye to their particular pastoral need. I remember St. Damien of Molokai. His particular pastorate was to a leper colony in Molokai in Hawaii. And when he himself contracted leprosy, he got up and said, "My fellow lepers." That was something that no one else could say, but he could, because that was his pastoral role. How can I bring the gospel in this particular historical circumstance? And that's true of the church universally, too, and down through the ages. So it was very appropriate after the Council of Trent for the church to put together a catechism based on the dogmatic teaching of the Council of Trent. To make that available to local pastors in the work of their ministry, so they'd have that accessible to them. Now, before the Council of Trent, you couldn't have had a catechism of the Council of Trent. You couldn't have. They're not changing the doctrine. The Council clarifies the doctrine in light of present circumstances, namely the circumstance of the Protestant Reformation. The Second Vatican Council did something similar. The Church looked around the world and said, we're having some issues. World's changed a lot since the 16th century, or even since the 19th century. We need to address this. We need to figure out what is the best way to present the never-changing, once-for-all deposit of faith in present circumstances. And the Second Vatican Council was called to do that, to try to find the best way to articulate the gospel in the modern world. And in my judgment, it was a fantastic success. But the interpretation of the council sometimes was fraught with difficulty, and people got different things out of it. Mm-hmm. So John Paul II said, you know what we need? We need an updated catechism. We hadn't had an updated catechism in 500 years. Let's update the thing. And so they did, and they wrote the Catechism of the Catholic Church, and Pope John Paul promulgated it in 1994, and it became the official standard for catechists and bishops and priests and lay people when they go to teach the faith. If you want a handy-dandy reference on what Catholics believe, the Catechism of the Catholic Church is where you go. Now, as a work of the ordinary magisterium, in other words, this is just the Church in its sort of daily, continuous work of how do we present the faith, the statements within the Catechism of the Catholic Church have only as much authority as the sources from which they are drawn. Okay? Now, it has authority as a catechism because it's promulgated by the magisterium. This is the reference. That's the authority of the catechism. If you're doing catechetics, this is the reference that you are to turn to. But when you open up the book and you want to know, okay, how should I understand paragraph 1115? Like, what's that particular language? How absolutely should I take that language? Well, what the Church has told us is, if the catechism is quoting the Bible, well, the Bible is the infallible, inspired, inerrant Word of God. Okay, so that quotation is inspired and inerrant and infallible. If it's quoting, say, the Council of Nicaea, which is an infallible dogmatic definition, okay, well, the portion of this paragraph that quotes Nicaea is an infallible dogmatic definition.
Okay.
What if the catechism quotes a prayer of Therese of Lisieux? Well, that's not an infallible dogmatic definition, and it's not sacred scripture. It's the prayer of a saint. So that quotation in the catechism has no more authority than any prayer of any saint, except insofar as the Church has selected it as an exemplary kind of prayer of the faithful. All right? So the content of the catechism is not weighted equally. It really depends on the nature of the source from which it was drawn. All right? And the choice of the selection material is not something that's guaranteed by the charism of infallibility. So when the editors of the catechism, Cardinal Schönborn was majorly involved in this, said, hey, this is a good spot to put a prayer. What are we going to put? Well, I like Therese of Lisieux. And somebody else says, well, I like Teresa of Avila. And the Therese people, they outvoted the Avila people for that paragraph. That's not infallible, right? There's not some infallible truth that Teresa's prayer is a better choice here. It's just a prudent choice.
Okay.
Right? You see what I'm saying? And so the Pope can certainly, it's absolutely within his authority, to select and shape the material that is presented as sort of the standard for doing catechetics. But you evaluate the language in the catechism according to the nature of the source from which it was drawn. And when it comes to the question of the death penalty, which you raised, you have to actually look at what the Pope said and ask yourself the question, did he change the text of the catechism? Yes. Did he change Catholic dogma? The answer is no. What he's done is he's changed the application. He's changed the way in which the Church is being asked to articulate the dogma in present circumstances. He's not changed the teaching of the Church. He's just changed the text of the catechism. And yes, that falls within his authority to do so.
You think that'll lead to another printing? Or perhaps a revised edition?
Who knows?
Yeah, fascinating. All right, and Jim, thank you so much for your call. Hope that is helpful for you. That opens up a line for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let us go from one call to the next call. This is Jeff in Springfield, Missouri, listening on Sirius XM 130, and a first-time caller as well. Hey, Jeff, what's on your mind today?
Hi, how are you doing today?
Very well. Thank you for your call.
Right, so got a strong ecclesiastical background, but I'm just learning a lot about Catholicism that I didn't know before. Just learned about Immaculate Conception, how the official doctrine is that Mary was conceived in the traditional way without original sin because God intervened so that wouldn't happen, kept original sin from being part of her conception. So my question is, if this is a thing God can do and does do, why was it reserved for Mary as opposed to being done for all humanity, just globally?
Okay, thanks. So let me first of all qualify a few of the terms in your premise, because the way you stated them could be misleading to listeners who don't know what the dogma is. You said that Mary conceived in the traditional way. If you mean by that the normal way, that's certainly false. Her conception was not in any shape, form, or fashion normal, but it was a virginal conception. So I got to throw that out there to make sure people don't misunderstand the language. All right. Yeah. Secondly, the way you describe God's intervention excuse me, I'm sorry. My head is on backwards. We're talking about the conception of Mary, not the conception of Jesus. I'm sorry. Whoops. Back up what I just said. Yes, Mary was conceived in the normal way. Sorry. Right. She wasn't virginally conceived. She conceived Christ virginally, but she herself was born in the normal way. Sorry.
There you go.
I just had my head on backwards.
That's okay.
All right. When you said that God intervened to prevent the transmission of original sin, original sin, according to Catholic teaching, is actually a privation. Okay, it's not like a positive substance that gets transmitted, the way I would hand off a letter. All right, it means the lack of something. What is lacking in original sin? Sanctifying grace. Adam and Eve were created in sanctifying grace. When their progeny were created without the gift of sanctifying grace, and that's what original sin means, that we are born without the gift of sanctifying grace. So God's intervention in the conception of Mary, which did happen in the normal way, was not to prevent the transmission of something positive that she would have inherited from Anne and Joachim, but rather it was the infusion of something that would otherwise have been lacking. He infused into her at the moment of her conception sanctifying grace in a kind of perfect mode so that she would be preserved from every actual sin throughout her life. So that's the way it took place. Now, your question, why not just do that for everyone? Well, we could ask the same thing about why not just prevent the fall of Adam?
Mm-hmm.
Why not just create all of us like angels? Why bother giving us bodies? Why create the world with the determinate dimensions that it has instead of making it 25% larger or 10% smaller? Why didn't God make a lot more oak trees? Well, we could raise that question about any historical particular fact, right? And at a certain level, we have to say, in God's providence, that's the way He did it because that's how He revealed it, and we're done. All right, but we can begin to speculate a little bit to work out the intelligibility of the thing. Clearly, when God permitted the fall of Adam, when He permitted human moral evil, when He permitted sin, it was because He intended to bring out of it a greater good. Jesus Himself said, "There's more rejoicing in heaven over one sinner who repents than over 99 righteous people who have no need of repentance." Okay, so there's something about the drama of fall and redemption, sin and grace, that's worth the universe. It's worth creating a universe to God in which there are fallen creatures who are redeemed in comparison to a universe in which no one ever fell and no one is ever redeemed. Now, why is that valuable to God? Well, why would He do it that way? That's a bit of a mystery, except we ourselves know, a novel in which no one ever has any problems is kind of boring. There is a goodness inherent in the drama of moral decision-making that we can discern in our own lives that's obviously valuable to God too. And it's significant, it's reasonable, it's fitting that God would send a Redeemer, namely His Son Jesus, and that He would also set aside a woman who would become an icon of perfect discipleship for the rest of the church and become the mother of the church. That's fitting. Is it absolutely logically necessary? No, He could have done it differently, but that's the way He did it.
Okay. Jeff, thank you so much for your call. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. This is the weirdest thing. I got to tell you, it seems like everybody we're hearing from today, their name begins with the letter J. We had Jim, then Jeff. Coming up is James and Jody. And then we also have checking in Justin, who lives in Jasper. I mean, you can't make this stuff up.
That's like my children. I've got a whole bunch of J's in my house,
yes,
including
you do.
My wife is a J.
Yes, you do.
Yeah.
All right. Well, then let's go to Jody and see what's on Jody's mind in Colorado, listening on St. Gabriel Radio. Hey there, Jody. What's on your mind today?
Hi there. Thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
I've noticed on social media the last 6 months there's an awful lot of promptings to contact psychics, tarot readers, and that type of thing. And everybody's searching for answers now, of course. And I'm just wondering, what is the Church's teaching on contacting psychics and that type of thing, and what is the repercussions for people who engage in that?
Yes, thank you. So this is a just horribly dangerous thing to do. It is a terribly dangerous thing to do, very foolish and very evil, and we must stay away from this kind of activity. Absolutely. No, we do not flirt around with this kind of thing at all. It is strictly forbidden in sacred scripture. It's strictly forbidden in Catholic tradition. And the worst possible outcome is that one opens oneself up to demonic influence and potentially even possession. And it is a terribly malevolent and dangerous thing. Even from a non-Christian point of view, even from just a purely secular or even materialist point of view, no good could possibly come out of this. I remember when I was in high school, and long before I was Catholic, a couple of girls I knew were doing this kind of business, and I said, look, if you were walking down a street at night and a voice came out of a dark alley and said, come down here, little girl, would you go? And they were like, well, of course not. And I said, well, so you're not in the habit of listening to disembodied voices. Why would you change now? Like, why would you just trust that somebody has your best interest in heart just because they happen to not have a body, right? It's insane. Yeah, we absolutely don't do it. Please, please, please. There are much better guides to the moral and spiritual life, namely the teaching of the Catholic Church.
Better believe it. Jody, thank you so much for your call. In a moment, we'll go back to the phones and talk with James in Lincoln, Nebraska. Larry will be breaking our J spell here in Detroit. We have a line or two open for you right now as well at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. The Friday afternoon edition of Call to Communion here on EWTN. Do stay with us.
The words of Blessed Carlo Acutis.
Do not be afraid, because with the incarnation of Jesus, death becomes life, and there's no need to escape. In eternal life, something extraordinary awaits us.
EWTN, teaching the truth.
I had called in last spring about talking to my parents, and I was going to convert to the church and how to talk to them. They were not happy at all, but I was confirmed to the church at the Easter Vigil service, and we really don't talk about the topic, but our relationship is still intact, so that's a good thing. Just wanted to say thank you, and I still listen every day because I always learn something new.
EWTN. Live truth. Live Catholic.
Listen, friends, St. Paul was in quarantine. He was under in-house arrest for 2 years. And you know what was crucial in impacting his attitude? It's how he perceived himself in his circumstance. And, while awaiting his execution, he was writing things like, in all these things, we are more than conquerors. And why? Because of him who loved us. You see, as real as the struggle is that we're in right now, there's something more real. And it's the gospel of Jesus Christ. It's the eternal destiny waiting for all of us, no matter what happens when we live and die in him. This is the reality that we have to keep our hearts and minds set on in the midst of all these things. I went to the grocery store the other day, saw everything cleared out. I felt hit in the gut. And why? Because of how I was perceiving myself in the midst of that what's happening? I'm abandoned. I'm reliant on the system to keep me provided for. And I reversed my thinking, countered that lie, and said, no. I'm loved by Jesus Christ in the midst of this. And in the midst of this, right now, I'm more than a conqueror in him. Speak truth to yourself about who you are.
For more, text Chris at 44144. This is Chris Stefanik on EWTN Radio.
There's never a shortage of news to grab our attention.
What have you been paying attention to?
Share it tomorrow on Take 2 with Jerry and Debbie on most of these EWTN stations.
We now return to Call to Communion.
Glad you're with us on this Friday afternoon edition of Call to Communion. We do have a line open for you right now at 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. Let's go to James now in Lincoln, Nebraska, listening on the Great Spirit Catholic Radio. Hey, James, happy Friday. What's on your mind today?
Hey, happy Friday to you. I am a convert from a very strong evangelical family, and I had a great family experience, had a great relationship with Jesus. And Dr. Anders, you had a lot to do with that conversion. I have a friend, very close friend that I've been dealing with for a while, who is also a very strong Christian, loves the Lord, but he's very good at evangelizing. So bringing people to the Lord, and not just getting people to say the prayer, but actually bringing them in to become a Christian. And now he's strongly considering becoming Catholic, but I don't know how to. He asked me a question on what does that mean for his evangelizing and for what that does. It kind of stumped me at that point.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So I really believe he's going to have to radically rethink what it means to have a relationship with Jesus. I really do. And what it would mean to evangelize people and introduce them to Christ. And it's going to be kind of difficult. It might be a little bit psychologically painful because it's going to be such an adjustment in the way he's used to relating to people. There's I appreciate the fact that you said your friend is not just interested in getting people to pray a prayer, but to really change their lives. I really am happy about that. But I believe that there is still a mindset in a lot of evangelical evangelism that sees a kind of line in the sand between the saved and the lost. And this is a relic of Calvinism that I can really know with certainty that you can be in one camp and then you're in the other camp. And the goal of evangelism is to kind of get somebody over that line. And that's really not the way Catholics think about salvation or relationship to Jesus. There's not this determinate line in the sand that we can recognize and know with certainty, and the goal is to get people across the line. That's not how it works. As a Catholic, the way we think about it is that what we're trying to do is move people, including ourselves, incrementally into greater and greater love of God and neighbor, wisdom, compassion, and charity. And there's not a line in the sand where you can say with certainty, well, before yesterday I didn't have wisdom, compassion, and charity, and today I've got them, right? No, it's a progressive thing, and there are benchmarks, there are pointers along the way, and the most important of them is baptism. All right, so that's the first thing. I do want to get somebody baptized, but even baptism, while it confers grace and membership in the church, doesn't mark me out as being saved. It marks me out as belonging to Christ and the church and having entered into the path and into relationship with God. But it's a relationship in seed form that I then have to cultivate and maintain and persevere in throughout the whole course of my life. All the sacraments are benchmarks in this way. Baptism is one. Confirmation is one. Of course, the Holy Eucharist is the source and summit. It's the principal one. But the whole thing about the Eucharist is it's repeatable. Unlike a Billy Graham crusade where you go once and give your life to the Lord, the Eucharist is my daily bread. It's the give us this day our daily bread that we ask for. It's the ongoing participation in the life of the church in Christ, ultimately to lead me to heaven, finishing off with my last communion at Holy Viaticum. And so my conception of what it means to introduce somebody to Jesus also has a deeply ecclesial component. That I have to believe that I'm not really authentically in relationship to Christ apart from his body, the church. And so all of these things come into my conception of what it means to evangelize. And, let me give you an example, another point, an illustration from my own life where these differences became really pertinent to me. I can remember when I was still evangelical, I was at Wheaton College in Illinois in around, say, about 1990. And I was still very much in the mindset of, get people over the line. And I remember walking through the college bookstore at Wheaton, which is an evangelical Christian, Protestant school, and I picked up, of all things, a book by Mother Teresa. And you're kind of like, well, what was I doing in a Protestant bookstore? I don't know, but there it was. I think it was the one called Words to Love By.
Oh, sure.
And I remember reading an anecdote about the life of Mother Teresa. And she tells a story about pulling a woman out of the gutter, and that's what she did all day long, was pull people out of gutters. And this was a dying woman, and she was being consumed by vermin, and she was in great pain, and her, just a really awful situation, suffering physically a lot. But as Mother Teresa began to minister to the woman, she recognized that her greatest suffering was emotional, relational, internal, because she'd been abandoned by her son. And so she felt this great weight of loss and pain and even anger towards her son. And as Mother Teresa was bandaging her wounds and loving on her and ministering to her up until the woman's death, what she finally brought this individual to do was to forgive her child. And her dying words were, I forgive him, I forgive my son. And the woman died with forgiveness and love in her heart as a Hindu.
Wow.
And I remember reading that and thinking, all right, there's something just really fundamentally different here about Mother Teresa's evangelism and mine. Because in the tradition I had grown up in, people would have smiled benignly at the idea that you could forgive your son, but hey, we thought you're not saved by works, not even by such a work as forgiveness. You're saved by faith in Jesus. And so what we would have thought, what Mother Teresa really needed to do was get this woman to pray the sinner's prayer. We're about the forgiveness stuff later. After she gets to heaven, she's not going to be resentful. Let's get her over the line. Mother Teresa wasn't concerned about that. She wasn't concerned about marking people out as damned or saved or lost or saved. She wanted to know, how can I help this woman grow in charity? And that was more important to her.
Yeah, she wasn't keeping a ledger, was she?
She wasn't keeping a ledger. She was like, this woman is suffering in her heart from a spiritual ailment of resentment and bitterness and abandonment. How can I help her overcome that in her heart? Knowing that in doing that, she was in fact helping this woman become more like Jesus and share more in Jesus, and she was going to let the question of, judging the lines fall to God.
Sure.
Well, that's just a very different way of thinking about evangelism. Now, if the woman had stayed alive, maybe she would have fallen so in love with the example of Mother Teresa that she would have asked to become Catholic, as many people have by watching Mother Teresa, drawn into a deeper and deeper, more explicit and open relationship with Christ and the Catholic Church. So I do think your friend will have to rethink what it means to evangelize, and may have to be, in some senses, aiming for a lot more, and in other senses, satisfied with a lot less, if that makes any sense.
It does to me. James, thank you so much for your call. It is Call to Communion here on EWTN. Well, we have a couple of lines open. If you want to get in right now, I would recommend it. Otherwise, your question is going to have to wait till next week. 833-288-EWTN. That's 833-288-3986. All right, let's go to Larry right now in Detroit, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Larry, what's on your mind today?
Hello. Thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I often struggle with this when the angel fell and became the devil. Where did his evil thinking come from? Because there was no devil yet.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate the question. So every evil choice, every one without exception, is the choice of some good thing, but in an inordinate way. Every time we choose evil, we are choosing something good, but we're choosing it in the wrong way or in the wrong proportion. And in the case of the devil, what is the good that he was choosing? Because everything God made was good. There weren't any bad things to choose. What the devil was choosing was his own excellence in an inordinate way. He chose the good of his own excellence over and above the glory of God. And so that's what was available to him as a choice, and that's what he chose. And then in doing that, he lost the gift of sanctifying grace and lost the possibility of the beatific vision, and in fact never had the vision of God. Some people imagine that the angels were, blissfully present with God before the fall and then they got kicked out. It's not how it works, because if you actually see God in his essence, you can't sin. It's not possible for you to. All right? The holy angels, in their one act of righteousness, were confirmed in sanctifying grace and immediately admitted to the beatific vision. The devil and his angels never saw the beatific vision of God, lost that grace, and they live now in utter despair, knowing that they'll never be admitted to that vision.
Larry, thank you so much for your call. Call to Communion here on EWTN. Our phone number 833-288-EWTN. If you have a question for Dr. David Anders, 833-288-3986. Got a great show for you to check out this weekend. Blessed to Play with Ron Meyer. That'll be on Sunday afternoon at 4:30. This week, Ron talks with Rebecca Callison about her college soccer career at George Mason University and what she's doing these days on college campuses. Be sure to join us at Sunday afternoon, 4:30 p.m. Eastern, right here on EWTN Radio for Blessed to Play, a wonderful show and a wonderful part of our weekend lineup for you here on EWTN Radio. Justin, watching us on YouTube, wants to know, why do priests wear a Roman collar? And what are the different ways the deacons, priests, bishops, and cardinals dress? And what do these forms mean?
Oh, heavens. Please. I am just not an expert in the history of Catholic vestments. I mean, many of them are drawn from, the liturgical vestments are drawn from the era of ancient Roman nobility. I believe the Roman collar actually has its origins in the military garb of the Italian state. I mean, there's all kinds of sort of different strands that play into this. I even think some elements of the papal vestment have a Persian prehistory. I'm not the guy who's the expert on this topic, but when Constantine made Christianity legal, and he sought to really confer a lot of dignity on the church and the form of the basilica, which was a state building, and he gave some to the Catholic Church. Some of the trappings and the regalia of Roman office were taken up by the bishops, and their vestments came along as well. Now, the idea of having vestments and of treating the Eucharist as something special and out of the ordinary, I mean, that goes back to the New Testament era.
Mm-hmm.
But the specific traditions and the decorum and the protocols and so forth, I mean, these have a long and ancient history that's largely Roman, but it's one on which I'm not terribly expert.
There you go, Justin. Appreciate your question via YouTube. Let's go to Ron right now in Mansfield, Massachusetts, listening on Sirius XM 130, a first-time caller. Hey, Ron, what's on your mind today?
Yeah, I've got a kind of an important question, at least to me. If an individual actively supports, donates money to an organization or an individual that supports abortion and is spoken out against the Catholic Church, is that a mortal sin to actively support that individual with money and with support, even though you know that that's going to increase the number of abortions? I'm asking because I'm very active in the parish, Knights of Columbus, and curious by the number of Catholics who seem to ignore the whole abortion issue.
Yeah, thanks. I really appreciate the question. So it kind of depends. The Catholic Church, when we cooperate with evil, and you're talking about cooperating with evil here, the Catholic Church differentiates kinds of cooperation. There are different ways we can cooperate with evil. There's one way that we absolutely must never do. There's no exceptions, and that's called formal cooperation. Formal cooperation is when I desire the evil that's being done. So in the instance that you've raised, let's say if somebody supports some pro-abortion cause or agency or politician or whatever, because they seek to make access to abortion easier or more available, or they want to have more abortions or something like that, this person is formally cooperating in the evil of abortion, and that's gravely wrong, and no exceptions. There's no way out of that. You're just wrong, all right? Now, there are other ways you can cooperate with evil. You can cooperate materially with evil. That is, you're not willing the evil, but you're providing some means, some matter that makes the evil achievable for the agent who's performing the evil. Now, donating money is definitely material cooperation with evil, all right? It definitely is material cooperation with evil. Whether material cooperation is permitted or not permitted depends on your proximity to the evil. So to take an example from abortion again, let's say you're a surgical supply company and you make scalpels. There's nothing wrong with making scalpels. We got to use them for surgery.
Yeah.
But then you sell some of them to an abortion clinic, and those scalpels are used for an immoral procedure. Well, is the surgical supply company guilty of participating in abortion? No, because they may be making these things for vet practices for all I know. And they're like, that's not their intent. That's how the thing was used, but that's not what they're trying to accomplish. What if you are the attending nurse and the abortionist says, "Here, hand me a scalpel"? Yeah, you can't plead, "Well, I'm not really in favor of abortion." Your material cooperation is so proximate, so close that you're guilty. You're guilty. You're complicit in this thing.
Yeah.
And in the case that you've raised, I think again it really kind of depends on how proximate. So, if you've got a company that sells a lot of hamburgers and that's their principal line of business, and they're a fast food restaurant, and you're patronizing the fast food restaurant because you like hamburgers and you're trying to feed your kids, that's a morally illicit thing to do. Then you find out after the fact, oh well, they're also donating money to this bad cause. That's your material cooperation there is very, very remote. All right, and that's how you have to kind of gauge these things.
Okay. Appreciate your call, Ron. Call to communion here on this Friday afternoon on EWTN. Let's go to Madeline right now. Madeline's in Hill City, South Dakota, listening on the great Real Presence Radio, a first-time caller. Madeline, what's on your mind today?
First off, thank you very much for the good work you guys do, and want you to know that not everybody could be as fluent in discussing these things as Dr. Andrews is. So thanks for even sticking your neck out and doing these things.
I really appreciate that, Madeline. Thank you very much.
The question I have is about the free will, and how important is free will in the plan that God has for us, and how that fits in with Jesus Christ and Him offering us choices too, so that we can make choices. And
yes.
In the context of, like, if you had like everybody in the government of the U.S. was Catholic people who were doing exactly what they should be doing, and so they pass all the laws and everybody's just super good, but in their hearts they're just following the law because they'll get punished, and they really, like, they want to go out and have an abortion anyway with an illegal person like they do in Brazil, since it's illegal there, and so they go out to someone else and they have like 500,000.
I see what you're saying. I see what you want to know. You want to know, like, if we could construct society in such a way that everyone's outward behavior would seem to conform to the natural law, but inwardly they were really kind of gnashing their teeth and kicking against the goads, what would their state be with respect to salvation, and how does Jesus play into that? Well, first of all, it's a fun hypothetical question. We're a long way from constructing a society in which everybody follows the natural law. You know?
Amen,
I mean,
brother.
That ain't going to happen anytime soon.
Yeah.
Never has and never will. But let's just, could you do it? Could you do it? No, you wouldn't be saved, right? St. Paul talks about this in 1 Corinthians chapter 13 when he says, if I have the gift of knowledge and can fathom all mysteries, if I give all my possessions to the poor, if I surrender my body to the flames, I do all these extraordinary things with my body, but I have not charity, if I have not love, I'm nothing. And with charity, all of these outward works become meritorious and beautiful and noble, but without charity, they all can become quite vicious. And, I'm always talking about my buddy, Father Lambert Greenan, the Dominican priest who meant so much to me, who died 2 years ago this month. And when I used to go see Father Lambert, he had all this wisdom, all this knowledge. He had years and years of Thomas Aquinas stuffed in his head. He could talk a blue streak about theology or church history, whatever it was. So much wisdom, so much knowledge. But what really made him delightful and a wonderful Christian man, in my judgment, was the way he could attend personally to the individual in front of him, give himself entirely to another individual, willing their good, loving them, wanting what was best for them. And when he brought that disposition, all that wisdom, all that knowledge was beautified by his act of charity. But imagine going to the very same priest who had all that knowledge, all that talent, all that wisdom, if he didn't have charity. And you've been in situations like this. You've been around a seemingly wise person, intelligent person, knowledgeable person, capable person, does outwardly all the, but when you can tell, they don't really care about me. Yeah. It just means nothing to you. Mm-hmm. It just means nothing to you. You've got to have that charity in your heart. Now, what about Christ? When Christ comes and he gives us a gift of grace, what does that do to our free will? Okay. Well, here's a kind of a cheesy analogy. All right. Grace is kind of like the performance-enhancing drug of the spiritual life.
Wow.
When the runner goes out or the football player goes out and he's been taking stuff that gives him some super juice.
Yeah,
he can run like nobody else can run, right? But he still has to use his own free will. He can't say, well, I took the super juice and therefore we just automatically win the touchdown. No, he's got to actually run the touchdown. And in the spiritual life, grace comes along and enables us to do what we could never do by mere nature, right? But you still got to do it.
Right.
You still got to cross the finish line. You still got to run the race. You still got to do the loving. And love is a human act. It is I that loves. It's Tom that loves. It's Madeline that does the loving, but empowered by the supernatural power of God. But it's still you who does the loving, and you got to do the loving.
What a great call. Madeline, thank you so much for checking in with us today, and you be sure and call anytime. Here now, Richard in Hickory, North Carolina, listening on Sirius XM 130. Hey, Richard, what's on your mind today, sir?
Good afternoon, gentlemen. Tom and Dr. Andrews, you guys do a good job as always. I love listening to you.
Thank you.
You said something a little while ago that just kind of really woke me up. I heard something from somebody close to you guys. I won't mention the name. I don't want to start anything, but about you said. Hold on, I'm in traffic. I just lost my train of thought.
Uh-oh.
You said that Satan was he didn't see the face of God. He didn't have the beatific vision. And I heard that Satan, or Lucifer, was a seraph angel, and that he did see God, and through his pride and arrogance, and somewhere else I read that he was jealous that when God created us humans, but the descent started, but it was mostly through his pride and arrogance as a seraph angel that's when the descent, and he fell away. So I'd like to know, did he see, or was he there, or was he not there?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm answering the question based on the teaching of St. Thomas Aquinas in the 63rd question of the Summa Theologica and the Prima Pars, the first part. So this is not my doctrine. I'm getting this from the Common Doctrine of the Catholic Church. And Thomas's teaching on this is that Satan did not experience the beatific vision. Couldn't have, right? Because the beatific vision is the satisfaction of every desire. It leaves nothing to be desired. It's infinite bliss. So once you have the beatific vision, well, how could your will be attracted to a lesser object? It's not possible. It's like the man. This is a weak analogy, a very weak analogy. But when a man is with his beloved, he has eyes only for her.
Sure.
He's not going to be distracted by some flu. It's not going to get his attention because he's only got. I was looking for the right word here. He's only got eyes for his beloved. Now, when we have the beatific vision, that is the beloved of beloveds. Nothing can draw you away. Now, it wouldn't be wrong to say that the devil experienced a very glorious state. I mean, that's true. He had a very glorious state and had some rational understanding of the goodness and glory of God, but more remotely than he would have experienced in the beatific vision had he stayed the course.
Okay, very good. Richard, thank you so much for your call. We barely have enough time for a quick one from Charmaine in Brooklyn. Charmaine, what's on your mind today?
Hi, good evening. I normally listen to the show. It's good, very informative. I just wanted to ask a question because you said the guy that called before said that...
we got about 5 seconds. Ask quick.
Okay, I just wanted to know if I'm sending money to the Catholic Church and molestation is taking place, am I supporting something that is...
Absolutely not. No way, because you're sending money to the church because you expect the money to be used for the care of the poor and the celebration of the sacraments, not used for any kind of evil. The person who is responsible for that evil is the one doing the evil, who's misappropriating those funds, and that person will face a very heavy judgment from God, from the civil authorities, and from the church. But you're not complicit in that at all.
Wow, am I glad we got that question in. That's awfully important.
I'm glad we got it answered.
Absolutely. Charmaine, thank you so much for your call. Could not get to Nancy in Atlanta, also has a great question. Nancy, I'm hoping that you will call us next week, whatever day you choose, and just mention that we couldn't get to your question on Friday. We'll put you at the head of the line. Hey, Dr. David Anders, thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Tom.
We hope that you have a wonderful weekend, you and your family.
You too.